Speak English in America. The harsh words cut through the peaceful evening air like a knife, shattering the innocence of 8-year-old Maria Martinez as she sat on her front porch steps, softly singing a traditional Mexican lullaby her grandmother had taught her during their last visit to Guadalajara. The neighbor, Robert Thompson, stood on his lawn with his arms crossed, his face twisted with the kind of anger that comes from fear of anything different, anything that challenges the narrow view of what America should sound like. Maria's sweet voice had been carrying the melody of Estrellita, a song about a little star that guides lost travelers home, when Thompson's shouting interrupted her innocent moment of cultural connection. The little girl's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at the angry man, not understanding why the beautiful song her abuela had sung to her was something that made people so upset. "Why can't you people learn to fit in?" Thompson continued, his voice carrying across the quiet Las Vegas neighborhood where the Martinez family had lived for 8 months. 8 months of trying to build a life while facing daily reminders that they were unwelcome. "This is America. We speak English here. Keep your foreign noise to yourself." Maria ran inside, her small footsteps echoing on the wooden porch as she burst through the screen door, tears streaming down her face. "Mama, why does singing make people angry? Why does being Mexican make them hate us?" The questions broke Carmen Martinez's heart because she didn't have answers that would make sense to an 8-year-old who only wanted to share the beautiful music her grandmother had given her. What the Martinez family didn't know, what none of their hostile neighbors knew, was that just 3 streets away, Elvis Presley had been sitting on his own porch that evening, taking a rare break from his demanding performance schedule at the Las Vegas International Hotel. He had heard Maria's sweet voice carrying on the desert air, and he had heard Thompson's ugly response. Elvis had been drawn to the melody, recognizing the haunting beauty of traditional Mexican music that reminded him of songs he had encountered during his travels, songs that spoke to universal human experiences of love, loss, and hope that transcended language barriers. When Thompson's shouting had cut through the music, Elvis felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, the same anger he had felt as a child, when people looked down on his family because they were poor, because they lived in government housing, because they didn't fit other people's ideas of respectability. But this was different. This was about cultural identity, about language, about the right to preserve and share the traditions that connected families to their heritage and their ancestors. Elvis had grown up poor, but he had never faced the additional burden of being told that his very language and culture were unwelcome in his own neighborhood. As Elvis sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of a family's pain carrying through the desert air, he made a decision that would transform not just the Martinez family's experience, but his own understanding of what it meant to build bridges between different communities in America. To understand why this moment would become a turning point for an entire neighborhood's approach to cultural diversity, you need to know about the journey that had brought the Martinez family to this point of questioning whether the American dream was worth the price of constant rejection and cultural denial. Luis Martinez had arrived in Las Vegas from Guadalajara, Mexico, 16 years earlier with nothing but determination, a basic understanding of English, and dreams of creating opportunities for his future family that simply didn't exist in the economically struggling region where he had grown up. The youngest of 7 children born to a family of farmers, Luis had watched his parents struggle against drought, economic instability, and limited opportunities that made advancement nearly impossible regardless of work ethic or intelligence. His decision to come to America had been motivated not by dissatisfaction with Mexican culture or values, but by practical recognition that economic opportunity was limited in his home region. Luis carried with him a deep love for Mexican traditions, music, food, and family structures that had sustained his community for generations, but he also recognized that preserving those traditions would require finding economic stability in a place where such stability was possible. The journey north had been challenging, both logistically and emotionally. Luis had to leave behind everything familiar, everyone he loved, and the cultural context that had shaped his identity, while navigating immigration processes, language barriers, and cultural adjustments that required constant adaptation and learning. His first years in Las Vegas had been devoted to basic survival, finding work, learning English, understanding American social and economic systems, and gradually building the skills and relationships that could lead to stable employment and eventual advancement. He had worked construction jobs, restaurant positions, and maintenance work, always with the goal of developing expertise that would make him valuable to employers and eventually lead to supervisory positions. Luis had met Carmen Flores at a community center where both were taking English classes in the evenings after their regular work shifts. Carmen had followed a similar path from Mexico, driven by her own dreams of creating a better life while maintaining connection to the cultural traditions that had shaped her values and worldview. Carmen had grown up in a family where education was highly valued despite limited resources. Her mother had been a teacher in a small rural school, and her father had worked multiple jobs to ensure that all of his children could attend school and develop skills that would create opportunities beyond those available in their economically limited community. Like Luis, Carmen had come to America not because she rejected Mexican culture, but because she wanted to create a context where she could preserve and pass on the best aspects of that culture, while providing her future children with educational and economic opportunities that would allow them to thrive and contribute to their adopted community. Their courtship and marriage had been built on shared values that bridged their Mexican heritage and their American aspirations: commitment to family, respect for education, strong work ethic, and determination to contribute positively to their community, while maintaining pride in their cultural background. When their children were born, Luis and Carmen had made deliberate decisions about how to raise them with strong connections to both cultures. They spoke Spanish at home, not as a rejection of English or American culture, but as a way of ensuring that their children would be bilingual and bicultural, able to navigate both worlds with confidence and competence. They celebrated Mexican holidays and traditions, prepared traditional foods, and maintained connections with extended family in Mexico, while also embracing American civic participation, educational opportunities, and community involvement. Their goal was to raise children who would be fully American while remaining proud of their Mexican heritage. Maria, Carlos, and Rosa had grown up understanding that they were Mexican-American, not Mexican or American but both, with access to the strengths and advantages that came from bicultural identity. They were fluent in both languages, knowledgeable about both cultural traditions, and comfortable navigating both social contexts. But the family's decision to move to their current neighborhood had been their first real encounter with systematic cultural hostility. Previous living situations had been in more diverse areas where their bilingual conversations and cultural practices had been unremarkable because many families maintained similar connections to their countries of origin. The new neighborhood represented an attempt to move up economically and socially, to provide their children with access to better schools and safer streets, while building equity through home ownership. They had saved for years to afford the down payment on a modest house in an area where property values were stable and rising. What they had not anticipated was moving into a community where cultural conformity was expected, and where their visible and audible differences would be seen as threatening rather than enriching. The neighbors were not necessarily bad people, but they were people who had never been challenged to think about cultural diversity as anything other than a problem to be solved through assimilation. Robert Thompson, the neighbor who had yelled at Maria, was representative of the community's approach to difference. A third-generation American whose grandparents had immigrated from Ireland, Thompson had grown up in a family that had successfully assimilated by abandoning most traces of their Irish heritage and embracing a generic American identity. Thompson's hostility toward the Martinez family came not from personal malice but from genuine belief that successful integration into American society required abandoning foreign languages, customs, and traditions in favor of conformity to established American norms. In his mind, the Martinez family's maintenance of Spanish language and Mexican traditions represented a refusal to become truly American. This perspective was shared by many neighbors who saw the Martinez family's cultural practices as evidence that they were not committed to full participation in American society. When children in the neighborhood heard Spanish spoken at home, when traditional Mexican music played during family gatherings, when the smell of authentic Mexican cooking drifted from the Martinez kitchen, these were interpreted as signs of separatism rather than cultural richness. The discrimination the family faced was rarely overt or intentionally cruel. More often, it took the form of social exclusion, condescending assumptions about their capabilities and intelligence, and subtle pressure to conform to neighborhood norms that required abandoning visible markers of Mexican identity. Children in the neighborhood were discouraged from playing with Maria and Carlos, not because their parents harbored active hatred toward Mexican people, but because they worried that their children might learn Spanish words or develop interests in cultural practices that would mark them as different from other American children. Carmen experienced the cultural hostility most acutely during her daily interactions with other mothers and local business owners. Store clerks would speak to her slowly and loudly, assuming she couldn't understand English despite her obvious fluency. Other mothers at school events would interact with her politely but distantly, never extending invitations to social gatherings or making efforts to include her in the informal networks that helped families navigate community resources. Luis faced workplace challenges that were more subtle but equally limiting. Despite his proven competence as a maintenance supervisor at the Las Vegas International Hotel, he sensed that advancement opportunities were restricted by unspoken assumptions about his capabilities and cultural fit within the organization's management structure. His colleagues were professional and respectful in their direct interactions, but Luis noticed that he was rarely included in the informal conversations and social activities that often led to information about advancement opportunities, professional development programs, or leadership positions within the organization. Maria, Carlos, and Rosa began showing signs of shame about aspects of their heritage that they had previously celebrated, sometimes expressing embarrassment about speaking Spanish or participating in Mexican traditions that set them apart from their peers. Maria, at 8 years old, was beginning to ask why their family had to be different, why they couldn't just be like other American families who didn't face constant scrutiny and social barriers. Her questions broke her parents' hearts because they reflected the internalization of messages that being Mexican was something to be ashamed of rather than celebrated. 12-year-old Carlos had stopped speaking Spanish at school and began asking if he could change his name to Carl so that other children wouldn't immediately identify him as Mexican. His musical talents, which included both traditional Mexican folk music and contemporary American styles, were being suppressed because he worried that displaying knowledge of Mexican musical traditions would further mark him as different. 15-year-old Rosa faced the most complex challenges as she navigated high school social dynamics while maintaining academic excellence, despite teachers and classmates who sometimes treated her achievements with surprise, as if success from someone with her background was unexpected rather than the natural result of strong family values and personal dedication. Rosa had begun to feel torn between her family's expectations that she take pride in her Mexican heritage and the social pressure to minimize visible markers of that heritage in order to gain acceptance from peers and teachers who could influence her educational and social opportunities. The family found themselves facing an impossible choice: maintain their cultural heritage and accept continued social exclusion, or gradually abandon the traditions, language, and customs that connected them to their roots in order to achieve fuller acceptance in their adopted community. Neither option felt sustainable or fair. Abandoning their cultural identity would mean losing connection to the values, traditions, and relationships that had sustained their family through difficult transitions and continued to provide meaning and stability in their daily lives. But continuing to face daily rejection and discrimination was taking a psychological and emotional toll that threatened their children's self-esteem and their family's cohesion. The evening that would change everything began on a particularly difficult day for the Martinez family. Maria had come home from school crying because her teacher had asked her to stop speaking Spanish during lunch period, even though she had been helping a new student from El Salvador understand instructions in English. Carlos had been excluded from a school music performance because his suggestion to include a traditional Mexican song had been dismissed as not appropriate for an American audience, despite the fact that the song's themes of family and community values aligned perfectly with the performance's stated goals. Rosa had overheard classmates making jokes about taco families and speculating about whether her parents were in the country legally, comments that reflected ignorant assumptions about Mexican immigrants and their legal status in American communities. Luis had faced his own workplace challenges when a colleague had complained to management about Luis speaking Spanish during his lunch break while calling his elderly mother in Mexico, arguing that English should be required at all times on hotel property, despite the fact that the hotel served international guests who spoke many different languages. Carmen had been told by a neighbor that the smell of her traditional cooking was too strong, and that she should consider preparing normal American food instead of ethnic dishes that made other residents uncomfortable in their own neighborhood. The accumulated weight of these daily indignities had brought the family to a breaking point where they were seriously considering selling their home and moving back to a more diverse area, even though it would mean giving up their dreams of homeownership and access to better schools for their children. It was in this context of family crisis and cultural rejection that 8-year-old Maria had sought comfort in singing the lullaby her grandmother had taught her, a song that connected her to generations of strong Mexican women who had faced their own challenges with dignity and cultural pride. When Robert Thompson's angry shouting had interrupted her innocent moment of cultural connection, it represented not just individual hostility, but the broader pattern of rejection that had been steadily eroding the family's sense of belonging and self-worth in their American community. As Maria ran crying into the house, asking her mother why being Mexican made people angry, Carmen Martinez felt the full weight of the impossible situation they faced. How could she explain to her 8-year-old daughter that their neighbor's hostility came from fear and ignorance rather than any real problem with Mexican culture or their family's character? How could she help her daughter understand that the beautiful traditions passed down through generations of their family were valuable and worthy of preservation, even when the community around them seemed determined to suppress and reject those traditions? How could she maintain her children's pride in their heritage while also preparing them to navigate a society that often demanded cultural conformity as the price of acceptance and opportunity? These were the questions weighing on Carmen's heart as she held her crying daughter, not knowing that 3 streets away, Elvis Presley was asking himself different but related questions about his own role in building bridges between communities and using his influence to challenge the kind of prejudice that was tearing apart a family's dreams. Elvis had been deeply moved by the sweetness of Maria's voice and the beauty of the traditional Mexican melody she had been singing. As someone who had built his career on music that borrowed from and celebrated diverse cultural traditions, Elvis understood that American music was strongest when it embraced rather than excluded the rich heritage that immigrant communities brought to the country. His own musical development had been shaped by African American blues, white country music, gospel traditions, and yes, Latino musical influences that had been part of the American Southwest's cultural landscape for generations. The idea that there was one American sound that excluded Mexican musical traditions was not just wrong but historically ignorant. More importantly, Elvis's own childhood experiences with poverty and social exclusion had given him deep empathy for families who faced rejection because they didn't fit other people's narrow definitions of respectability or belonging. He had seen how prejudice could damage children's self-esteem and limit families' opportunities for advancement and community participation. As Elvis sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the Martinez family's pain carrying through the desert air, he began formulating a plan that would challenge his neighbors' assumptions about cultural diversity, while demonstrating the artistic and social value of embracing rather than rejecting Mexican traditions. The plan would require patience, diplomacy, and a willingness to use his celebrity status not just for entertainment but for social change and community building. It would mean stepping outside his comfort zone to engage with cultural traditions that were different from his own background while respecting the dignity and autonomy of a family that had already faced too much unwanted attention and scrutiny. But Elvis had come to understand that his success and visibility carried responsibilities beyond personal enrichment and professional achievement. He had a platform that could be used to challenge prejudice and promote understanding, and the Martinez family's situation presented an opportunity to demonstrate how community acceptance could be built through personal relationships and cultural bridge building. The next morning, Elvis made his first move toward connecting with the Martinez family by speaking with Louis during his regular maintenance work at the Las Vegas International Hotel. The conversation began casually, as Elvis asked about Louis's background and family, but it quickly developed into a deeper discussion about the challenges of maintaining cultural identity while building life in a new community. Elvis learned that Louis was not just a skilled maintenance supervisor, but an intelligent man with deep knowledge of Mexican history, culture, and traditions who had made enormous sacrifices to create opportunities for his children. More importantly, he discovered that the entire Martinez family shared a deep love of music that connected them to their heritage while providing a source of joy and family bonding. "My grandmother was a singer in Guadalajara," Louis explained as they talked in the hotel's mechanical room. "She taught traditional songs to all the women in our family, songs that told stories about our history, our values, our connection to the land and to each other." Elvis was immediately interested. What kind of songs? Ballads about love and loss, work songs that helped people get through difficult times, lullabies that carried hopes and dreams from mothers to children, Louis replied. "My wife Carmen knows dozens of these songs, and she's been teaching them to our daughter Maria. The music has been part of our family for generations." "That sounds like an incredible heritage to preserve," Elvis said thoughtfully. "Music that carries family history and cultural values from generation to generation is precious. It shouldn't be hidden away or treated like something to be ashamed of." Luis looked surprised by Elvis's response. "Most people in our neighborhood don't see it that way. They think our music is foreign noise that doesn't belong in an American community. Most people don't understand that American music is made up of influences from all over the world," Elvis replied. "The music that made me famous borrowed from African American traditions, white country music, gospel, and yes, Mexican, and other Latino influences too. The idea that there's one American sound that excludes other traditions is just ignorance." The conversation continued over several days as Elvis made deliberate efforts to spend time with Luis during his hotel shifts, learning about Mexican musical traditions, while sharing his own perspective on how different cultural influences had shaped American popular music. Elvis discovered that Luis had grown up playing guitar and singing traditional songs at family gatherings and community celebrations. Carmen was an accomplished singer who knew dozens of traditional Mexican ballads and folk songs. All three children were musically talented, with strong voices and natural rhythm that reflected their cultural heritage. More importantly, Elvis learned about the daily challenges the family faced in their neighborhood, the social exclusion, the subtle discrimination, the pressure on their children to abandon their cultural identity in order to gain acceptance from peers and teachers. "The hardest part is watching our children begin to feel ashamed of who they are," Luis explained during one of their conversations. "Maria came home crying yesterday because her teacher told her to stop speaking Spanish, even though she was helping another child. Carlos wants to change his name so people won't know he's Mexican. Rosa is starting to hide her cultural knowledge because she thinks it makes her seem less American." Elvis felt a familiar anger at the injustice of children being made to feel ashamed of their heritage, but he also recognized an opportunity to use his influence to change the community's perspective on cultural diversity. "What if we could show your neighbors what they're missing by rejecting your family's cultural contributions?" Elvis suggested. "What if we could create a situation where they could hear your family's music and understand its beauty and value?" Luis was intrigued but cautious. "Mr. Presley, you're very kind, but I'm not sure our neighbors are ready to listen. They've made it pretty clear that they want us to become invisible or leave. Maybe they haven't had the right opportunity to see your family as neighbors rather than outsiders," Elvis replied. "Maybe what they need is a chance to experience Mexican culture as art and beauty rather than as something foreign and threatening." Over the following weeks, Elvis developed a plan that would gradually introduce the Martinez family to their neighbors in contexts that would highlight their talents and contributions rather than their differences. The plan began with small gestures that would establish Elvis's friendship with the family while demonstrating their worthiness of respect and acceptance. Elvis began making regular visits to the Martinez family home, initially coming to learn more about traditional Mexican music, but gradually becoming a genuine friend who enjoyed spending time with all family members and learning about their perspectives, experiences, and dreams for the future. His visits had an immediate impact on the family's status in the neighborhood. Residents who had previously avoided or ignored the Martinez family suddenly became curious about the people who were receiving regular visits from one of the world's most famous entertainers. The change in neighborhood attitudes wasn't entirely positive at first. Some neighbors were suspicious about why Elvis would be interested in spending time with a Mexican-American family, and others seemed to resent the attention and status that Elvis's friendship brought to people they had worked to marginalize. But Elvis's consistent presence and his obvious respect for the Martinez family began to shift community perceptions in subtle but important ways. When Robert Thompson saw Elvis sitting on the Martinez family's porch, listening respectfully as Luis played guitar and sang traditional Mexican songs, it challenged his assumptions about the value and legitimacy of Mexican cultural traditions. When other neighbors observed Elvis engaging in animated conversations with Carmen about Mexican history and cultural practices, treating her as an intelligent and knowledgeable person rather than a foreign curiosity, it forced them to reconsider their own dismissive attitudes toward the family's cultural background. Most importantly, when neighborhood children saw Elvis spending time with Maria, Carlos, and Rosa, speaking with them in a mixture of English and Spanish, encouraging their musical talents and cultural knowledge, it began to break down the social barriers that had isolated the Martinez children from their peers. The transformation process was gradual and sometimes uncomfortable, as longtime residents were forced to confront their own prejudices and assumptions about cultural diversity and community belonging. But Elvis's patient and consistent advocacy for the Martinez family created social pressure for more inclusive and respectful behavior. The breakthrough moment came when Elvis proposed organizing a neighborhood concert that would feature the Martinez family's musical talents alongside his own performance, creating a community event that would demonstrate the artistic value of cultural diversity while providing entertainment that everyone could enjoy. The proposal initially met with resistance from community members who were uncomfortable with the idea of highlighting Mexican music in what they considered an American neighborhood. But Elvis's involvement and the prospect of a free concert featuring him gradually overcame most objections. "Look," Elvis addressed a gathering of neighbors who had come to discuss the concert proposal. "The Martinez family has knowledge and talents that could enrich our entire community if we're willing to listen and learn." He continued, "Maria sings with a sweetness and purity that reminds me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Carlos has technical skills on guitar that took me years to develop, and he's only 12 years old. Rosa has a voice that could make you cry with its beauty and emotional depth. But more than their musical talents," Elvis said, looking directly at Robert Thompson and other skeptical neighbors, "the Martinez family represents values that I thought we all shared. Hard work, family loyalty, respect for education, commitment to community. They're not asking anyone else to become Mexican, they're just asking for the right to be Mexican-American, to contribute to this community while maintaining pride in their heritage." The concert planning process became an opportunity for genuine cultural exchange and relationship building between the Martinez family and their neighbors. Carmen began teaching interested mothers how to prepare traditional Mexican dishes, while Luis worked with local men on building a stage and organizing logistics for the community event. Maria, Carlos, and Rosa found themselves suddenly popular among neighborhood children who became curious about their bilingual abilities, their knowledge of Mexican history and traditions, and their musical talents that had previously been hidden from community view. Teachers at the local school began recognizing Rosa as a gifted student whose bicultural background was an asset rather than a limitation, someone who could help other students understand different perspectives and cultural approaches to common human experiences. The evening of the concert attracted people from throughout Las Vegas, drawn initially by Elvis's participation, but staying to appreciate the sophisticated artistry and emotional depth of traditional Mexican music performed by the Martinez family. The performance began with Elvis performing several of his familiar songs, getting the audience warmed up and comfortable before introducing the Martinez family and explaining why he had become interested in learning about Mexican musical traditions. Music is a universal language that speaks to human experiences we all share: love, loss, hope, struggle, celebration, Elvis told the audience. The songs you're about to hear tonight come from a cultural tradition that's been part of the American Southwest for hundreds of years, long before this land became part of the United States. But more than that, he continued. These songs represent the same values that are celebrated in country music, gospel, blues, and every other American musical tradition: the importance of family, the dignity of work, the power of love to overcome hardship, the strength that comes from community support. When the Martinez family took the stage, there was initial uncertainty from some audience members who had never heard traditional Mexican music performed live. But as Maria's sweet voice began singing Estrellita, the same lullaby that had been interrupted by Robert Thompson's angry shouting weeks earlier, the crowd fell silent with appreciation. Her voice was pure and haunting, carrying melody that spoke to universal experiences of childhood wonder and the comfort of family love. When Carlos joined her on guitar, his technical skill and musical sensitivity impressed even skeptical listeners who had to acknowledge the sophistication and beauty of the musical tradition they were witnessing. Rosa's performance of La Llorona, a traditional ballad about love and loss, demonstrated vocal abilities and emotional depth that left the audience spellbound. Her interpretation of the song connected Mexican cultural themes to universal human experiences in ways that transcended language barriers and cultural differences. But the most powerful moment came when Elvis joined the Martinez family on stage, performing a collaborative version of Cielito Lindo that showcased how different musical traditions could complement and enhance each other without losing their distinctive characteristics. The performance demonstrated that American music was strongest when it embraced rather than excluded diverse cultural influences, and that collaboration between different traditions could create artistic experiences that were richer and more meaningful than what any single tradition could achieve in isolation. The audience's response was overwhelmingly positive, with sustained applause and calls for additional songs from both Elvis and the Martinez family. But more importantly, the concert had created a shift in community attitudes that extended far beyond that single evening's entertainment. Robert Thompson, who had attended the concert reluctantly, found himself deeply moved by the Martinez family's performance and ashamed of his previous hostility toward their cultural expressions. During the reception following the concert, he approached Luis to apologize for his earlier behavior and to express genuine appreciation for the musical traditions he had been privileged to experience. "I didn't understand," Thompson said sincerely. "I thought your family's culture was something foreign that didn't belong here. I didn't realize that Mexican musical traditions were already part of American culture, or that they represented values that are completely consistent with what I believe about family, work, and community." Other neighbors made similar acknowledgments, recognizing that their previous assumptions about the Martinez family had been based on ignorance and prejudice rather than accurate understanding of Mexican culture or the family's character and contributions. The concert's success transformed the Martinez family's relationship with their community and their own sense of belonging in America. They were no longer seen as outsiders who didn't fit in, but as neighbors who brought valuable cultural richness to a community that had been impoverished by its own narrow perspective on diversity and inclusion. Luis received a promotion at the hotel, partly because Elvis's endorsement had highlighted his capabilities to management, but mostly because his skills and work ethic were finally being recognized without cultural bias interfering with professional evaluation. Carmen became active in community organizations, using her bilingual abilities and cultural knowledge to help other immigrant families navigate services and opportunities, while building bridges between different cultural communities within the broader Las Vegas area. The children thrived academically and socially, no longer feeling torn between their cultural heritage and their American identity. They learned that being Mexican-American was an advantage that gave them additional languages, cultural knowledge, and perspectives that enriched their educational and social experiences while preparing them for success in an increasingly diverse and globalized world. The neighborhood itself was transformed by the recognition that cultural diversity strengthened rather than threatened community cohesion. Other immigrant families began moving to the area, attracted by its reputation for welcoming people from different backgrounds while maintaining strong community ties and shared civic values. Elvis's friendship with the Martinez family continued throughout the remainder of his career, with regular collaborations that influenced his musical development and introduced his audiences to musical traditions they might not otherwise have encountered. The relationship demonstrated his genuine commitment to cultural understanding and community bridge building, rather than superficial celebrity charity or publicity-seeking behavior. The story of the Martinez family became a model for how communities could successfully integrate diverse populations while respecting and celebrating different cultural traditions. Their experience showed that the American dream could be achieved without requiring the abandonment of cultural identity and heritage, and that successful integration could be built on mutual respect and appreciation rather than forced assimilation. Local schools began incorporating more diverse cultural education into their curricula, recognizing that students benefited from learning about different traditions, languages, and perspectives. The Martinez children became cultural ambassadors who helped other students understand and appreciate Mexican history, customs, and contributions to American society. The annual neighborhood festival that grew out of the original concert became one of Las Vegas's most celebrated community events, featuring music and food from multiple cultural traditions while building stronger bonds among residents who had learned to see diversity as a source of strength rather than division. Years later, when Maria became a bilingual education specialist, Carlos, a professional musician specializing in cross-cultural musical collaborations, and Rosa, a community organizer working with immigrant families, they credited Elvis's intervention with showing them that their cultural background was something to be proud of rather than ashamed of. The Martinez family's experience illustrated the possibility of maintaining strong cultural identity while fully participating in American society, proving that assimilation and cultural preservation could coexist when communities chose inclusion over exclusion and understanding over prejudice. Today, more than 45 years after that transformative evening concert, the story continues to inspire communities across America to embrace cultural diversity as a source of strength and enrichment, rather than a challenge to be overcome through forced conformity. The documentary film about the Martinez family's transformation, produced 20 years after Elvis's intervention, became a powerful educational tool used in schools and community centers nationwide to teach about cultural integration and the destructive nature of prejudice. The film won numerous awards and helped inspire similar community-building initiatives in cities across America. The documentary featured extensive interviews with all family members reflecting on their journey from isolation to acceptance, and their perspectives on how Elvis's friendship had changed not just their lives but their entire understanding of what it meant to be American while maintaining Mexican cultural identity. Elvis showed us that being American didn't mean stopping being Mexican, Lewis explained in his interview for the film. He helped us understand that America was supposed to be big enough for all of our traditions and cultures, and that our diversity made the country stronger, not weaker. Carmen's segment focused on the transformation of relationships with other mothers in the community, and how shared experiences of parenting had eventually overcome cultural barriers that had initially seemed insurmountable. Her story demonstrated how prejudice often dissolved when people had opportunities for genuine personal interaction. When the other mothers saw that I loved my children the same way they loved theirs, when they tasted my food and realized it was made with the same care they put into their family meals, the barriers started coming down. Carmen reflected in her interview. The children's perspectives as adults provided insight into the long-term impacts of growing up in a family that had successfully maintained cultural identity while fully participating in American society. Their success in their chosen careers and their continued commitment to serving immigrant communities demonstrated the positive outcomes possible when communities choose inclusion over exclusion. Maria's work as a bilingual education specialist had helped thousands of children maintain connections to their cultural heritage while excelling academically in English-language schools. Her innovative programs became models for school districts across the country seeking to serve increasingly diverse student populations effectively. What happened to our family taught me that children don't have to choose between being successful students and maintaining their cultural identity. Maria explained in the documentary. When we honor all aspects of who they are, children can achieve things that would be impossible if we forced them to deny part of themselves. Carlos's musical career had taken him around the world, performing traditional Mexican music and contemporary compositions that blended different cultural influences. His work demonstrated the artistic possibilities that emerged when musicians were encouraged to explore their full heritage rather than conforming to narrow commercial categories. Elvis taught me that the best music comes from being authentic to all of your influences, Carlos said during his interview. My Mexican heritage didn't limit my musical possibility. It expanded them by giving me access to rhythms, harmonies, and storytelling traditions that most American musicians had never explored. Rosa's community organizing work focused on helping immigrant families navigate American systems and services while maintaining their cultural connections. Her approach emphasized empowerment and community building rather than assimilation that required cultural abandonment. Our family's experience showed me that the American dream doesn't have to mean losing who you are, Rosa explained in the film. It can mean becoming the best version of who you are while building bridges with people from different backgrounds who share your values and hopes for the future. The annual Las Vegas Cultural Heritage Festival that grew out of the original Martinez family concert became one of the city's signature events, attracting visitors from around the world who came to experience authentic cultural traditions while witnessing the kind of community cooperation that the festival represented. The festival featured not just Mexican music and traditions but celebrations of the many different cultures that had contributed to Las Vegas's development. Italian, Irish, African American, Asian, and Native American communities all participated in events that demonstrated the city's cultural richness and the benefits of embracing diversity. The economic impact of the festival was significant, generating tourism revenue while providing business opportunities for entrepreneurs from various cultural backgrounds. Local restaurants, artists, and performers benefited from increased exposure and expanded customer bases that valued authentic cultural experiences. The festival's educational components included workshops where community members could learn about different traditions, languages, and customs, creating opportunities for genuine cultural exchange rather than superficial tourist consumption of ethnic differences. Children who grew up attending the festival developed sophisticated understanding of cultural diversity and strong skills in navigating cross-cultural relationships, preparing them for success in an increasingly globalized world where cultural competency was becoming essential for professional and personal advancement. The festival's success influenced other cities to develop similar celebrations that honored their own diverse populations while building community cohesion around shared civic values and mutual respect for different cultural contributions to American society. Elvis's continued involvement in the festival until his death in 1977 demonstrated his genuine commitment to the principles of cultural understanding and community building that had motivated his original intervention with the Martinez family. His participation was never perfunctory or publicity-driven but reflected authentic relationships and ongoing learning. The Elvis Presley Cultural Bridge Foundation, established after his death by Priscilla Presley and managed in consultation with the Martinez family, continued supporting initiatives that used music and cultural exchange to overcome prejudice and build understanding between different communities. The foundation's programs included scholarships for young people from diverse backgrounds who were studying music and cultural arts, community grants for cultural preservation projects, and support for community festivals that celebrated diversity while building social cohesion among residents from different backgrounds. Research conducted by universities studying the Martinez family's experience and similar cases of successful cultural integration identified key factors that contributed to positive outcomes: genuine respect for different traditions, willingness to learn from other cultures, focus on shared values rather than surface differences, and recognition that diversity strengthened rather than threatened community bonds. The research findings influenced immigration policy discussions by demonstrating that successful integration didn't require cultural assimilation, but could be achieved through approaches that honored heritage while building connections across cultural boundaries. The data showed better outcomes for both immigrant families and receiving communities when integration was based on mutual respect rather than forced conformity. Social workers and community organizers began using the Martinez family model in their work with immigrant communities, emphasizing strategies that supported cultural maintenance while facilitating full participation in American economic and social life. The approach proved particularly effective with children and young people. The model showed that children benefited from messages that their multilingual abilities and cultural knowledge were assets rather than obstacles to success in American society. Students who maintained strong cultural connections while mastering American academic and social systems consistently outperformed peers who had been pressured to abandon their heritage. Educational institutions developed curriculum materials based on the Martinez family's experience, using their story to teach students about immigration history, cultural diversity, and the importance of community acceptance in achieving successful integration. The materials were adapted for different age groups but consistently emphasized themes of respect, understanding, and strength through diversity. Teachers reported that students who learned about the Martinez family's experience showed increased empathy toward classmates from different cultural backgrounds and better understanding of how prejudice could be overcome through personal relationships and community action. The story became particularly effective in helping students understand the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. The story became central to diversity training programs for businesses, organizations, and community groups seeking to create more inclusive environments for people from different backgrounds. Training participants learned practical strategies for building relationships across cultural boundaries and creating environments where everyone could contribute their full talents. The Martinez family themselves became frequent speakers at conferences, schools, and community events, sharing their experience and insights about successful cultural integration while maintaining strong heritage connections. Their presentations emphasized that cultural diversity was not a challenge to be solved but a resource to be celebrated and utilized. Luis and Carmen's marriage became a symbol of how immigrant families could achieve stability and success while maintaining strong cultural traditions, demonstrating that traditional values and American opportunities could coexist and reinforce each other rather than competing for dominance in family life. Their home remained a gathering place for community members from various backgrounds who came to share music, food, and conversation that bridged cultural differences while building lasting friendships and professional relationships that benefited the entire community. The children's success in their careers and their continued commitment to serving immigrant communities demonstrated the positive outcomes possible when young people grew up in environments that honored their full heritage while providing opportunities for achievement and contribution to American society. Their own children, raised with knowledge of both Mexican and American traditions, became examples of how cultural heritage could be preserved and celebrated across generations while adapting to changing circumstances and opportunities in an evolving American society. The Martinez family's story continued to inspire new immigrants facing similar challenges of building lives in communities where they initially felt unwelcome, proving that persistence, dignity, and community support could overcome prejudice and create genuine belonging in American communities. Community leaders in cities across America cited the Martinez family experience when developing programs and policies designed to support immigrant families while building community cohesion around shared values and mutual respect for different cultural contributions to local economic and social development. The lasting impact of Elvis's friendship with the Martinez family demonstrated how individual actions by people with influence and visibility could create broader social change by challenging prejudice and modeling inclusive behavior that others could follow in their own communities and relationships. Their story remains relevant today as communities continue to grapple with questions about immigration, cultural diversity, and what it means to be American in a society that draws its strength from people of many different backgrounds who share common hopes for freedom, opportunity, and community belonging while maintaining pride in their distinctive cultural heritage.